Our east coast, the Atlantic coast, is warming faster than almost every other part of the world's ocean. It's one of the top 10 areas of all of the world's oceans warming over the past 50 years. There are very few species that haven't shown some kind of signal shifting their distributions with warming oceans.
The direction of the United States environmental policy is shifting, from the proposed budget cuts to NOAA Fisheries to the termination of the Environmental Protection Agency, all of which that could have detrimental effects to the seafood industry as our changing oceans become more and more unpredictable. Our nation's fishermen see the effect of climate change firsthand and on a global scale. Going back about 50 years, NOAA Fisheries began to listen to fishermen's observations of the oceans to get a better understanding of how fish stocks were changing. The fishermen noticed early on that oceans were beginning to change in very significant ways. So how can the Trump administration affect the seafood industry by making changes to environmental policies? First, let's find out how climate change is affecting the seafood industry. To answer this, we go to NOAA Fisheries headquarters in Washington, D.C.
My name is Roger Griffiths. I'm a marine ecologist with the Office of Science and Technology at NOAA Fisheries Service. Our job is to help maintain the nation's fisheries and all the people that depend on them. Over the past 40 years, along our east coast again, 70 to 80% of all of our U.S. fish stocks have moved northward hundreds and hundreds of miles, or they've moved deeper, following their preferred ocean temperature as the oceans have warmed. They were shifting distributions, they were changing the timing of their reproduction and of their migration. And as we begin to look into it, we are learning that there are also changes in the abundance of fish stocks in many regions. Oceans are driven by winds and temperature. In fact, the ocean is part of our climate system along with the atmosphere. As the atmosphere warms, that heat is absorbed by the ocean. In fact, the ocean is absorbing much of the heat that is generated from the sun every year. As the planet has been warming over the past 100 years, the ocean has absorbed over half of that extra heat. And because of that, the ocean temperature has been increasing quite quickly over the past 50 years.
What about Alaska or the Bering Sea? How is the climate change affecting those areas?
So the Alaska-Bering Sea area is one of the nation's richest fishery areas. And it too is one of the areas of the world's oceans that is changing very quickly, warming very quickly. A number of years ago, we observed a warming period in the Bering Sea, and during that period, the base of the food chain changed dramatically from one where there's a lot of food and it's rich and fatty, and the Bering Sea cod and other species thrive on that, particularly their babies. But during the warming periods, that food disappears, and we have almost no recruitment, no baby pollock and other species recruiting in. And the fishery managers in that area are watching those cycles very carefully, and they actually took action to reduce the fisheries, the catch during that time, to try and prevent driving the fishery into a complete collapse, hoping that by doing that, the fishery would recover, the stocks would recover more quickly as the system went into its more cool phase. So this is probably one of the best examples we have of sustainable fishery management in a changing time with changing climate and ocean conditions. This is the kind of model of fishery management in a changing ocean that we're going to need more of.
NOAA Fisheries has been trying to advance the understanding of climate impacts on fish stocks and fisheries, where basically they're trying to do three things for fisheries managers and the seafood industry. One, to provide more information on what's changing, how it's changing, and where it's changing. Two, to provide early warnings of changing conditions to the seafood industry in hopes to reduce impacts to businesses and to help sustain fisheries. And 3, conducting research and modeling so we can get better predictors of what managers and industries should be planning for 5, 10, and even 15 years down the road. Let's head over to Seattle now to learn more about the climate change and how the Trump administration can affect fisheries management.
My name's Ray Hilborn. I'm a professor at the School of Aquatic and Fisheries Sciences here at the University of Washington. We're in our building on Boat Street looking down at the ship canal, and I work on fisheries management both in salmon and in marine fisheries. Well, in the grand scheme of things, I tend to be an optimist, particularly with respect to fisheries and the environment. I mean, I'm very concerned about climate change and ocean acidification. Those are very big deals. But I grew up in California in the 1950s. You couldn't breathe the air in Los Angeles. In Seattle, you couldn't swim in Lake Washington. We did duck and cover drills in elementary school because we were worried about nuclear bombs falling on us. And, air quality, water quality, and most environmental things have improved a lot since then. Mostly that's because of a bunch of legislation passed in the 1960s, Clean Water Act, the Environmental Protection Act, those things. If the Trump administration actually succeeds in rolling those back, I don't think we're going to go back to the 1950s. With respect to fisheries, there's an enormous amount of misunderstanding. The abundance of fish stocks in the United States is increasing. It's not decreasing. We have very little overfishing in the United States. Places like New England, we've seen major increases in fish abundance in the last 20 years. And this is just outside of the science and the management community. The public thinks that all of our fish stocks are disappearing. And frankly, it's because there's a number of NGOs. That's how they raise money. They raise money by telling people things are terrible. I have to, in full disclosure, Greenpeace considers me an enemy and has personally attacked me as being a lackey of the fishing industry because about 20% of my research funding comes from the fishing industry. But if you talk to what I'd call the reasonable environmental groups like Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, World Wildlife Fund, they'll agree that fish stocks in the U.S. are increasing. There's no question that's the case. But it's Greenpeace is I would say the worst in that, they're not going to be able to raise money if people think that there aren't serious problems with fisheries, and they've got big staffs that need to be funded. And so, they come out with these campaigns about how terrible things are, and they're simply not willing to admit that we're doing a good job in the United States.